Look at this fucking over here. We're gonna cap at a nice restaurant like this.
That's one of the things I hate most when I'm in a restaurant. It's values today. Standards are crumbling.
Hello everybody, Dr. Alex Vasquez coming to you live in early December of 2024. Today I'm going to start publishing some work that I've worked on now for up to 25 years, but I'm going to kind of repackage it and update it with the general theme being brain health, but I'm going to specifically focus on migraine just because it's common, and it's a good model of brain dysfunction. And to further that more specific application, I could also talk about depression, but I think the more appropriate target is to talk about something called anhedonia rather than depression. And the reason for that is, treatment of depression is very, it's kind of rigid and limited. Whereas I think specifically addressing anhedonia actually gets us farther down toward the direction of where we want to go. So, I don't think the goal of medicine or psychiatry or whatever, family medicine or whoever's treating this, I don't think the goal should be simply getting rid of depression, because at that point, someone's only at a neutral status, right? So we could picture, kind of a neutral ground here, and depression or so-called antidepressive treatment only gets you back to neutral. Whereas if we address anhedonia, the implication is completely different. So hedonia implies pleasure. So anhedonia just means the absence of pleasure. But if we're treating anhedonia, the implication is that we're trying to get someone back to where they can actually enjoy life and feel good about themselves and have a positive outlook. Because from a neurophysiologic standpoint, like I said, getting rid of depression only gets you to neutral. But getting back to a place where life actually is pleasurable, again, as I'm discussing here, the treatment of anhedonia rather than the treatment of depression, the treatment of anhedonia actually gets you to a good life, whereas the treatment of depression only gets you back to neutral. So, as you can imagine, that's consistent with Nietzsche's philosophy, which is, for example, he talks about this in a couple different places in a couple different ways, but one of the ways he talked about it was the distinction between, and this probably applies, the distinction between slave morality versus master morality. And you could think of the treatment of depression as being kind of a slave psychiatry, only trying to get people to neutral. But, the elite or the master class, and that's a whole different discussion, but, the more elite categories of society, they don't give a damn about not feeling depressed. They're trying to enjoy life and, exert and grow their own power and creativity. So I never thought of that before. But again, I think we could kind of parallel the conversations of the medical treatment of depression versus a broader aspirational goal of alleviating anhedonia to actually get people back to where they enjoy life. And that does kind of rhyme conceptually with Nietzsche's philosophy of slave morality versus master morality. So like I said, I never thought of it that way. But I want to talk about brain health. I'll talk about migraine because it's a great model for brain dysfunction. Especially the fact that it's kind of episodic. That actually makes it more intriguing. And I had first written on this piece of paper in front of me, I had first written that I would connect brain health with depression, but like I said, that only gets us so far. The goal should not be just being a zero, which means you're no longer negative, but you're not actually positive either. The goal should be that we're actually positive, and that goes back to something that I actually wrote back in 2014 when I was doing some major revisions to inflammation mastery. At that point, I think I did call it inflammation mastery, but I also called it functional inflammology. So I'll show you what I wrote. You can see the cover as soon as it resolves, the image that is. You can see the cover of this. This is the smaller introduction. So this is chapters 1 through 4. Chapter 5 is a different book. If you get Inflammation Mastery, it contains all 5 chapters. If you get the 2-volume set as Textbook of Clinical Nutrition and Functional Medicine, then it's chapters 1 through 4, followed by chapter 5 in the other one. So when I was making some of these updates in August of 2014, I worked really hard to make the updates. I sent it to the publisher. We were living in Barcelona at the time, but the next day we were going to go to the United States to do a bunch of seminars, a series of seminars zigzagging across the entire country. And so I worked really hard to get the book finished. I sent it to the publisher. We went to the beach, about 15 minutes from where we lived in Barcelona, because we were living in Raval at the time. Maybe I'll try to show you a picture of where we lived. So Barcelona the original medieval Barcelona has 3 original neighborhoods: Raval, Gothic, and Born. We lived in Raval. So like I said, about 15 minutes from the beach. We went to the beach. As soon as I got to the beach, got into the water to kind of relax from having worked so hard to publish this book. The conclusion of the book occurred to me while I was, floating around on the beach within the first 30 seconds, what I should have said in the book and what I didn't say in the book. So, the idea came to me. We went back to the house. I re-edited this section of the book and then resent it to the publisher. So here's the change that I made. I'll show you this page because I think it's quite important. And it segues back with what I was talking about. So, going through chiropractic college, naturopathic medical school, osteopathic medical school, doing thousands of hours of postgraduate training, doing family medicine work after medical school, no one ever said, what the hell are we trying to do here? Obviously we're trying to treat patients and get them better, but what's the bigger conceptual goal? At least for me. Maybe some people don't think in those terms. But here's the way that I wrote it. Again, I never heard anyone articulate, and maybe because for them it was obvious, maybe for me it wasn't obvious, but I never heard anybody actually say, why are we doing healthcare to begin with? Like, what's the goal of healthcare? What should be the goal of healthcare? Just treating disease? So here, I wrote it out, and here's the way that I wrote it. The goals of healthcare should be the optimization of physical health and psychosocial intellectual freedom. You can see it's the last line because I didn't have to reformat the entire book. So I just put it in there at the very end, reformatted that chapter, sent it to the publisher, and that was it. But again, that goes back to my goal right now of trying to talk about brain health. I'm going to talk about brain health. I'm going to focus on migraine headaches because it's a great functional disorder. And rather than talking about depression, which the treatment of which only gets us to neutral, I want to talk about anhedonia, which means the lack of pleasure. Because, theoretically, and depending on your religious paradigm, from a non-religious standpoint, and I don't even know how broadly that applies, but from whatever standpoint, life should be pleasurable. And, 'And one of the manifestations of a healthy brain is that you're not simply not depressed, but you're actually enjoying life. And, that's a So again, that's why I don't want to use the word depression. I want to use the word anhedonia, which is the lack of pleasure, because the goal should be that people actually enjoy their lives, not just that they're no longer depressed. So hopefully that makes sense, and maybe it'll make sense as we go through. So again, since we're in December of 2024, that's kind of the new program or the new focus that I'm going to start publishing. Brain health, specifically focusing on migraine as an example of brain health or unhealth, and also anhedonia. Since we're in December and it's the holiday season, I'm going to repost my video on wine and whiskey, which I spontaneously made last year. But since it's the holiday season, I'm going to republish that video. The other thing is, I also started a different series, kind of titled "By the Time You're 50 Years Old," and so I'm going to fold that wine video into that series, because I think by the time you're 50 years old, you ought to be able to pick a competent. You should be competent in picking a decent wine. You know. So like I said last year when I made that video just spontaneously, just looking at people at the store, they're looking at wines, and the way that I was reading and interpreting their body language, it's like you could tell some people just didn't have any idea what they're doing. And sometimes I would, ask them, like, hey, do you want some help picking a wine? I'm not trying to be like Mr. Expert, but at least I know a few things about wine. And inevitably, they always said, yes, help me out here, I have no idea what I'm doing. And that doesn't mean I look for people to ask that question to, but when it seemed appropriate, that's how I manage it. Again, not trying to be anybody's expert, but I also, if I have useful information that I can share, then I'm willing to share that. So I try to make it available. So I just started this series, I guess last month, on By the Time You're 50 Years Old. By the time you're 50, I'm going to give you the top 4. It's probably not really the top 4, but at least it's the first 4. By the time you're 50 years old, you should know at least one good poem, memorized. By the time you're 50 years old, you should know the difference between a good wine or a bad wine, or a good whiskey or a bad whiskey, And I realize some of that's personal. The whole thing's personal. You can drink whatever wine or whiskey you want. But some wines are better than others. And by the time you've got a little bit of refinement in your ability to taste the difference, then it becomes very obvious. So and there's some wines that I will drink. I have some wines that I will drink happily, and I have some wines that I wouldn't drink because they're just not worth the hassle. And those are my personal reasons, but I'll tell you what they are, just to be clear. I personally would not drink a wine from California because the studies that have been done, formally or informally, whatever, and you can criticize them all you want, but the investigations that have been done have shown that the wines from California are loaded with pesticides, glyphosate specifically. So I personally would not drink a wine from California. I also, for the same reason, I wouldn't drink a wine from France, because the French wines are notoriously loaded with pesticides, especially from the Bordeaux region. And I've looked that up, and apparently it's true. But that was actually told to me when I was in France by a guy who lives in France, and he's a native Frenchman, and he said, don't drink the wines here because they have so many pesticides in the wines. We were in I don't know where we were, southern France, maybe Paris, but I don't recall exactly. I guess it was Paris. He said, don't drink the wines from France, but especially Bordeaux, because they're loaded with pesticides. I looked it up later. It turns out that it's true. So I don't drink California wines, and I don't drink French wines because of pesticides. I tend to drink Italian, but only Primitivo if I can get it. And it's hard to get, but Primitivo is probably my favorite wine on the planet. What I emphasized in the video that I did last year are the wines from Spain, because in my experience, they're the most reliable. We also, like I said, we lived in Spain for about 9 years, from 2013 to 2022. So I was very familiar with Spanish wines, and they're good quality. They have a good kind of ranking system that's reliable. So they have, I don't have a good example, and I don't remember the name right now. But they have kind of a young wine, and then you get into the reserves. And the reserves are at least 3 years old, and the grand reserves are 5 years old in Spain. I think that also applies in Italy. But it doesn't apply, for example, in Chile. In Chile, a reserve Chilean wine is only 6 months old. That's like fruit juice. That's not even a wine. And for me, the distinction is quite obvious. So I won't drink wine from California for the pesticides. I won't drink wine from France for the pesticides. I won't drink wine generally from Chile, even if it says reserve, because their reserve is only 6 months. And for me, their wines are horrible. After going to Argentina and going to Mendoza and trying to be friendly with Argentinian wines, especially Malbec, especially from Mendoza, I probably wouldn't drink an Argentinian wine either. I just don't like them. Maybe some people do, I just don't. So I'm pretty much stuck with Italian Primitivo, otherwise known as the Zinfandel grape, or a Spanish wine, typically from Rioja, but not always from Rioja. It doesn't have to be from that region. I just bought a wine totally by chance. Well, I guess not totally by chance, but it was by chance a few weeks ago, and it was a Spanish wine. It's a Tempranillo grape, but I have it right here, so hold on. It's a Tempranillo grape, but it's remarkably good. I'm just going to show you some examples. These are partially 2 bottles. So like I said, I love certain places in Argentina. This is a Malbec. Happens to have the name of my favorite neighborhood, which is San Telmo. But I would not drink. I just save it for the bottle. I don't like Malbecs. This wine is a Tempranillo. It's an organic. It's an organic Tempranillo from Spain, but it's not a Rioja. Let me see where it says it's from. From the southeastern province of Zamora. I don't exactly know where that is, but I think it's kind of central southern Spain, I believe. I could be wrong. If I'm totally wrong, I'll try to make a correction in the video. I didn't realize this was organic. But this is an organic Tempranillo from Spain. Organic wines tend to be pretty young because they don't have a good shelf life. And this tasted like a Primitivo from Italy. So I was pretty happy with that. And I paid for that one, first time I bought it, I paid $20, $22 for it. The second time I bought it at a different store, I paid $12 for it. Here's a Primitivo from Italy. Again, it's the Zinfandel grape. And I bought this thinking I was going to love it. I didn't really love it that much. I talk about wine and I talk about whiskey just for topics. I actually don't have much of a taste for, I don't have like some big desire to drink either one of them. Sometimes I do. But, like one glass and I'm done, typically. I don't know. Maybe it's the social setting. So I guess if I'm with friends and we're celebrating something, then everything, of course, tastes better. But as far as just like drinking a glass of wine for the hell of it, maybe one glass, with my nightly melatonin, but then I'm done. Different people react to alcohol in whatever way they do. For me, it just makes me feel sleepy. So like I can't. Some people like to drink. I don't like to drink. I have half a glass of wine with my melatonin and go to bed, and that's it. Other people, when they drink alcohol, they actually feel more stimulated and legitimately elevated or happier. I don't ever have that experience unless it's because of the social setting. So anyway, like I was saying, by the time you're 50, you ought to know, you ought to have memorized a good poem. You ought to know how to pick a good wine and a good whiskey. Specifically, of course, I'm talking about the difference between single malt versus a blend. Maybe some people don't have the problem with blends that other people do. So blends, by definition, are mixtures of different whiskeys. I interpret that as being lower quality. By definition, they're not filtered, which by definition means they have more congeners, which means you're more likely to get a hangover from a blend than you are from a single malt. So if I'm going to drink a whiskey, you're damn right, it better be a single malt. And from what I've looked at, two brands of whiskey are notoriously for not having additives and especially artificial colors. And those are Macallan and Glenrothes. No, is it Glenrothes? It's from Scotland, I believe. I think it's Glenrothes. Yeah. So it's the rounded bottle. So I'll put a picture of the bottle on the screen when I'm editing this video. But Macallan doesn't put artificial colors, and if I'm saying this correctly, if I'm remembering it correctly, it's Glenrothes, but it's the round bottle. Those are the only two brands that I'm familiar with that specifically don't put additives like artificial colors. So the other thing, and I have a few other items on my list, but I'm going to close out this video in the next 30 seconds. And that is, this is kind of a joke, but it's actually kind of serious, depending on a person's perspective. But by the time you're 50 years old, you also shouldn't wear a hat inside. That's not what hats are for. So I'll show you a video clip that I enjoy on that theme.
Let me ask you a question. Why does your wife hate me?
Champagne doesn't hate you.
Yeah, you lie like I play the French horn.
Why?
Look at this fucking over here. We're gonna cap at a nice restaurant like this.
That's one of the things I hate most when I'm in a restaurant. It's values today. Standards are crumbling.
I would have killed this coach to stick around until my kid graduates.
Then let him stay 4 years for Kiara. That burns my ass. Where you going?
That'd be great.
Take your hat off.
Excuse me?
They don't sell hot dogs here. They took the bleachers like 2 years ago.
It's my hat. I'll wear it where I want.
How you doing?
Thank you.
Look at him. Douchebag. Good for you. Send him about home cappuccino. And get license plate of these two guys sitting behind Arnie. Get valet door. They look like cops.
And that's my wrap up for this introduction of the new topics on brain health, specifically focusing on migraine and anhedonia. Because like I said, if we just focus on the treatment of depression, the best we're going to do is get people undepressed or back to neutral. And I think the goal, from my perspective, and obviously from a Nietzschean perspective, the goal isn't to simply be neutral. The goal is to enjoy life and to be, assertively passionate about something and certainly enjoy one's own creativity. I mean, by the time people can't enjoy their own creativity, they're pretty screwed. What they're showing or what they're living is a very limited version of life. And like I said in the book, the goal of healthcare should be the optimization of physical health and psychosocial intellectual well-being. The optimization, not simply getting people unstuck, but getting them to a place where they can actually enjoy life. So those are the things I'm going to focus on. I'll put out some videos today and over the weekend. But again, I'm going to advance the series on brain health using migraine and anhedonia as examples. And I'm going to continue now and then that series on, by the time you're 50 years old, you should do X. You should memorize at least one poem that you love. You should know how to pick a good wine and a good whiskey. And hopefully, you know the difference between wearing a hat indoors or not. So it's a little bit old school, but when I talk to people, and maybe it died out, with Generation X or before. But I've mentioned it to a few people, and some people get it and some people don't. Like if I were to say this to like the young kids that I mentor who are in their 30s, I suspect they would have no idea what I'm talking about. But if I talk to a person in Generation X or above, then they know the difference. And part of it comes from the military paradigm. So for example, in the military, you have a hat on outdoors, and then you take your hat off when you go inside. They even have a command specifically for it. It's obviously pretty simple. It's uncover. So if you've ever gotten anywhere near military training, then that's part of the routine. Is you have a hat on when you're outdoors, and you take your hat off when you're indoors. But also, in places of religious respect, so to speak, typically people take their hats off when they go into church or when they go into something that's considered sacred, even if it's not specifically religious. So I remember when we were in Italy one time, the only time we ever went to Italy, we went to the Pantheon, which is an old religious spiritual building, obviously built by the Romans. I mean, it's a famous structure. But the weather was cold, and I had like a knit hat on, and I wasn't even thinking about it. But in the process of being amazed by the structure, the security guard or the concierge or whatever came up to me and said, "You got to take your hat off. You can't have a hat on inside the Pantheon." Well, I didn't even know I had it on. So anyway, I'll wrap up this intro video. I'll get some new videos on the website as soon as I can, and hope you're all doing well. And I will see you on the internet very soon. Take care. Bye.